Hi, welcome to Divergency, the podcast for neurodivergents, especially adult females like myself. So, welcome to episode 1, and if you're listening to this, I thank you for giving me a chance, and I apologize in advance because I have a tendency to tell stories and ramble on with as much detail as possible, and I know that this is going to be a crazy wild ride. So if you're in for it and interested and like a little bit of sarcastic comedy, join me. We're going to have a lot of fun, I think. So I thought in this first episode, maybe the first thing that I would do is introduce myself. First of all, I guess, my name is Kate, and I am a female in my mid-30s. I live in Canada, and up until a couple months ago, I really just thought I was a strange duck, so to speak. And then someone said something to me about how they were positive that I had ADHD. And I thought, yeah, that's strange. That can't be right because I am definitely the opposite of hyper. And then I started researching it, and, some of it affected me, but there was some parts of it that I was like, this is just not me at all. But the more I kept digging into it, the more I kept coming up with information on neurotypical behaviors and traits versus neurodivergent behaviors and traits, and how neurodivergence, or the autism spectrum, are actually, it's actually a term that makes up a lot of these comorbid conditions. And just because you fit in with a couple of symptoms of one thing and a couple of symptoms of another doesn't necessarily mean that you are those things, but it could mean that you are autistic and experiencing life in those particular areas. Again, I forgive myself, and I apologize in advance to anyone listening to this and thinking, what the heck is she talking about? She doesn't know anything. Because I really don't know anything. I'm learning this as I go, and I thought I would share my journey with you as I learn and as I come to realizations about myself. So, as I mentioned before, I'm, female, mid-30s. I am very predominantly white, Caucasian, Canadian, very much single, and, just trying to figure out who I am. I thought that I had it figured out, but now I'm kind of re-looking at my life through the lens of a neurodivergent. So through the lens of a person on the autism spectrum. And disclaimer, at this point, I am not diagnosed. It is something that I am going to be doing and pursuing in the future. However, I'm not formally diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. It is at the moment something that I very much relate to, and I have some informal diagnoses, but nothing official, and we'll get into that in another episode probably. So who am I? Who am I now versus who I was? And it's a question I've been asking myself for a really long time. As a child, I certainly really had no idea who I was or what I was. What I did know is that I was not what everybody else wanted me to be. And I can remember very vividly a few times, but this one time in particular, I was sitting on the school bus, and I don't know if I was going to school or day camp. I can't really remember. Most of the time I walked to school, so it must have been a camp. But I was on the bus, and I had the best seat in the bus, the one that has the wheel hub where you can put your feet up. In retrospect, I kind of loved that seat because my feet weren't dangling towards the floor, and they were solid on the ground. Anyway, divergency. Sorry, tangent. As my mom would say, squirrel. But I remember being horribly bullied and harassed and just not fitting in with people, and people were just bugging me and taunting me and sitting on the bus, and all I wanted was to just jump up and say, okay, what the heck is so wrong with me? What is wrong with me? Just tell me. Tell me what it is that's wrong with me and I'll fix it. Tell me what it is that I need to do to be liked and accepted by you. And I'll do it. As if life was really that easy. And of course I never did that, because that would just be fodder for their taunts and teasing and whatever. But I did think it, and that wasn't the first time that I thought it. I was always wondering as a kid and as a teenager, how can I change so that society likes me, so that I fit in, so that I'm the same as everybody else. And adults around me would say, you don't want to be the same as everybody else. You're different. You're unique. That's great. Yeah, it might be great as an adult to be unique and not the same as everybody else, but when you're a kid, no. You want people to like you. And up until I was about 13 or 14, 7th to 8th grade, I say this not lightly, I literally had no friends. I was that kid in the schoolyard by herself, and I certainly had some, friends that would, hang out with me on the sly. And I had one friend one year who hung out with me all summer, and then I was so excited to go back to school, and I went to catch up with her on the first day, and she completely ignored me. And later that night we were on the phone together and talking, and I said, what the heck? And she said, well, okay, can you just not take this the wrong way, but can we, just be friends, outside of school, maybe at night and on the weekends? Yeah, mic drop. No. And I couldn't really understand. All I knew is that I didn't really know what the feeling was or the emotion. I know now it's being ashamed, but she felt ashamed by me, and she felt embarrassed, and she didn't want her quote-unquote cool and popular friends to know that she was hanging out with me and that she thought I was a cool person. And I got really mad about it. But what can I do? I didn't want to alienate one of the few somewhat friends or people that hung out with me, but I also didn't feel very good about that. And that's kind of what my childhood and grade school life was all about. It was jumping from person to person as they discovered that I kind of was a cool person, but they didn't want everybody else to know about it, because it wasn't cool to know me, and it wasn't cool to hang out with me. Looking back through this lens of neurodivergency, I'm a child of the 90s, and in the 90s, for one thing, autism, was fairly still new and hadn't really been researched all that much, but in 1990, that was the first year that Asperger's syndrome was even written about and even entered into the DSM, which is a diagnostic manual for psychologists. And in the 90s, autism was thought of as a predominantly male thing. And if you were female and had an autism diagnosis, there was a lot of research that seemed to try and point to an abundance of testosterone, leading to the reasons of why you were autistic. And that's just not the case. It was, you're grasping for straws. And everybody tried to make this out as a bad thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, I don't think. It could actually be a good thing. I look at the world differently than other people, and sometimes we need that in the world. So I spent my entire life, pretty much until, my mid-20s, trying to be what everybody else wanted me to be, which was no easy task, because they couldn't tell me what they wanted me to be. They couldn't tell me what was so wrong with me that they didn't want me. They just knew that I wasn't the person they wanted me to be. And so how do you reconcile that? How do you come to terms with that? I don't know. It meant that I had a childhood of extreme loneliness and feeling neglected. Certainly not by my parents, but by my peers. And just feeling like the odd one out, and like nothing was right. And it was a very, very stressful and hurtful time, and I really don't like thinking about my childhood too much, but I'm going to have to when I'm looking at life through this lens. So looking at my past experiences, especially as a child, and realizing that a lot of what I thought was just hardships or difficulties or challenges actually had a reason behind it. That's what this podcast is about. It's about being divergent. It's about those tangents, those things that are slightly off. That's what I call divergencies. So I am so glad that you found this, and I'm glad that you're listening, and I hope that you stay tuned for more, and we'll chat again soon.